This podcast sheds light on the incredible stories of those who served and are now navigating civilian life. Join me as we explore the challenges, triumphs, and unique perspectives of transitioning veterans. From career shifts to mental health, we cover everything. Subscribe now and amplify the voices of our heroes. Amplify Veterans, where every story matters. So it's another great day to Amplify Veterans. This episode joined with Jackie Davenport. Jackie spent 23 years in the Air Force, finished as a Chief Master Sergeant. Very intimidating for me. I think that's the highest ranking person that has come on the show. She is here today to talk about her overall career from military onto her civilian life. Also going to talk a little bit about the transition process for women in the military becoming civilians. So, Jackie, if you could fill in any gaps that I may have missed and then tell us a little bit of why you joined the military in the first place.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'm super pumped to be here today, and you should never be intimidated. I used to tell my airmen that I worked for that I was pretty much the same as an E4, but people just had to listen to me at that rank. So it was really nice. But yeah, so 23 years. Yeah, I didn't expect to do that. I came in for one enlistment when I was 17. So 4 days after I graduated high school, I left for the Air Force. And I grew up in East Texas, and my biggest goal was to get out of Texas. And then for the next year, I was in Texas. So that was really nice. So, so as an intel analyst, my entire career, it was really great. It was very unique. I ended up doing a lot of outside of the box things that I never really thought that would be open to me. I will say that I am not a believer in luck, right? To, kind of plagiarize the Seneca quote, right? It's when opportunity meets preparedness. And so that is sort of how I lived, the 23 years. I always set myself up so I could say yes to everything. And I did. And that led me to a lot of different assignments, overseas deployments. And then I did some air crew tours. I got to help lead my career field at one point, which was really cool as a young NCO. And then I went to special operations, where the environment was really that of what can you do as a person. And so I think that was pretty influential in my, growing up, right, in the Air Force. And then I took another very different path and decided that I needed to take a knee. And unfortunately, I didn't have a good support structure at that moment to do that. So I just continued to fly by the seat of my pants, and I Palace chased at 16 years active duty and went reserve. Mostly so I could have a real life, because I had a pretty busy deployment schedule up until then. And I became a part-time reservist, went to school, did an internship on the Hill, just really got out of my comfort zone. And then I went back active duty when I realized I could actually get my retirement, because I didn't even know that. And so I got to stand up some cyber squadrons, again, work with some really, really talented leaders and people. And I got to learn from tons and tons of airmen who were way smarter than me, which was humbling and amazing. So I retired out of San Antonio in 2022. So coming up on almost 2 years, which is kind of crazy. And it was great. It was really, really good. But I say that to say that I've kind of transitioned twice. And so when I retired, it wasn't quite as difficult, because the first one was really hard. So that's kind of the big piece of the story. I will say that, just to caveat the rest of the conversation, You should know that I am fiercely independent and painfully stubborn. And so that has really sort of driven paths for me that are a little bit different than I think most people have taken. And I have a pretty different perspective on it too. So that's the military piece for me. I came out when I retired. I again, I keep saying I don't believe in luck, but it could have been real close to that if I was a believer. And that is one of my people in my network, right? Which is going to be probably something that I repeat through this conversation and the importance of that. But they reached out and said, "Hey, I have this awesome job that you should come and do." And and I said, "I know nothing about that. I don't think I want to." And then I kind of had a gut check and I was like, I've never done that before. I've never said I don't know anything about that. I don't, I jumped out of airplanes with the army for goodness sakes, right? Like I didn't know anything about that. And we weren't really supposed to be jumping out of airplanes, right? I'm in the Air Force. We land in the plane. That's the goal. And, and so I just said, I've never self-selected before. I've always said yes. So I'm going to say yes. And I ended up in a really unique culture that I actually really enjoy, and I get to talk to people every day and help give them solutions and fix problems. So that's what really kind of speaks to me and fills my cup right now. And it's good. It's good. Like sales is a dirty word, right? Sometimes when you're in the uniform on the other side, but I find that if you just level with people and just have real conversations, right? Take it back to the roots that it doesn't even matter if they say no, right? You still get to make friend and that's great.
That's right. Sales can be dirty for sure. I think we can think of a few used car salesmen that we've spoken with in the past, and that just becomes like the stereotype of a bad salesperson. But um, not all sales are bad for sure. Sounds like you've got a pretty good deal where you're at, and definitely want to talk more about that here in a little bit. But again, want to just echo the the powerful woman that you are, that you've exude. And I was on a submarine, so I didn't have any women leadership when I was in the military. So that's just not something I'm used to. But certainly wish that there were more female leaders in the military as I was coming up, because I feel like that brings a unique perspective to leadership and the command in general. So super pumped to hear more about a few of these things that you talked about. You said that when you were enlisted, there were some things outside the box that you weren't expecting that you'd have the ability to take advantage of. What are some examples of those out of the box things?
Yeah. So, and it's funny because those two things really tie together for me. As a really young NCO, I think it was my third assignment. I had been like a staff sergeant for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half or so, not very long. I landed in Germany and my flight chief was a very strong and powerful woman, and she is my best friend and still an example of the person that I try to be. And she really took me under her wing and we're like, "No, no, you are going to come with me." So I had the ability to write the doctrine for an entire new weapon system, right? Like who gets to do that as an E5? Like how amazing is that, right?
Wow.
And then, at the time it didn't really resonate with me, right? Cuz I'm like 23. But but yeah, and so that kind of just continued on and I had a really strong like female tribe around me. There were some strong senior NCOs who were women who understood the landscape that we were in and were able to say, "Hey, like this is how you're going to have to navigate this, right? You're going to have to be above reproach. You're going to have all of the boxes checked, right? For the ability for you to say yes and do these things." And I learned that from those people. And then I got an opportunity to go, fly on one of the newest ISR, tactical ISR platforms. And the coolest part about that is I cut a deal, right, based off of the hard work that I had done to where I didn't have to cross train and I got to come back to my old career field, which was great. So I got to go do that for a year and I met even more amazing people. And then I went and screened for a special mission unit for special operations. And I had no clue what I was getting into at all. But I knew that if it was good for me and they were good for me, and I was pretty comfortable in my own skin at this point, right? So I was just like, hey, if you guys want to hire me, that's great. If you don't, that's great, right? Like, what, see ya,
Yeah.
and so that was good, but that really put me in a very different position. I mean, I'm wearing civilian clothes, I'm working in an intel agency, deploying with people that I thought only existed in movies. And, I'm jumping out of airplanes, I'm flipping over in cars, like shooting my friends with sim rounds, like, and I'm an intel analyst in the Air Force, right? And a female at that. So I got to work with amazing people. I got to do things that I just never really thought I would be able to do. Right. I had the opportunity to work with MIT Lincoln Labs and we built some cool stuff. I got to take that downrange. Right. I got to make it effective and provide those solutions. Right. And help people out and give them better intel before they went on target. So it was really, really a cool experience for me. But it was also really tough. And and in this community, I found that my tribe of women was much, much smaller. There were about, I don't know, three of us. And it was harder. When you walk into an operations center full of special forces and special forces support, you can go ahead and assume that you're probably going to be one of the few women, which puts you in a spotlight that really isn't super comfortable to be in. But it also, you kind of feel like you have a strike against you, right? You already have one strike against you because you're a woman. You have another strike against you because you're an intel guy, right? You're an intel kid. And there's still, I don't think, any such thing as an intelligent success, right? And then the third was I'm in the Air Force, right? Like we are few and far between in that community. So I just had to remember those lessons that were taught to me by, those strong senior NCOs and, hey, like you're gonna have to be better to be even. And that's not fair, but it is sometimes reality, right? Like I am always going to be the most prepared person, right? I might not know what you're talking about, but I'm going to be as prepared as I possibly can before I walk into any room. And so it kind of teaches you that grit, right? The grit of just working hard. And so those are lessons that I think apply across the spectrum, you know? But as a whole, I mean, I did have some awesome experiences, but I think the biggest takeaway, and obviously, when you get to take care of people, you realize that that's really what it's about. I mean, I went through a very like different journey where I just wanted to do tech stuff and mission stuff. And no, I don't want to do any of that stuff. I just want to do this. And and then when I had the opportunity to lead a team, I was like, man, I could just get these roadblocks out of the way that nobody removed for me. And I can make things simpler and we can do things better and faster. Right. And I do think that you're right on that perspective piece. Women do bring a different perspective, right? Like you can argue, hey, we can all do the same things, but that's not really true. Like we think differently. And so that is a great thing to bring in. Like why not have somebody who's not scared to be like, "Hey, why are we doing it that way? Like you guys just complained about it for 20 minutes. Like do we have to?" And so I found that like that voice, that devil's advocate kind of red teaming person was the person who drove change. And I really liked that. And I had the opportunity to drive a lot of change, and that was great. And then when we stood up the cyber unit in my reserve capacity. That was amazing. And I got to go back to active duty and lead that same unit again with an amazing like female commander. And we were like the command team. Our squadron won all these awards. Our airmen were winning all these awards, right? And that's really where the satisfaction comes in, right? When you get to stand in front of your people and be like, you guys are awesome, right? Like, you make my job easy. I get to just stand here and write awards packages. Like, this is great. But yeah, I mean, when you get to work with strong women and you can see yourself in those roles, right? It does change the landscape for you when you feel like you're kind of the minority or a second class citizen in this space. And I say that not to say that I was ever treated that way on the whole, right? Because I wasn't. I mean, there were obviously moments, right? Chow halls in Iraq and, random, whatever. But that stigma is still there a little bit, right? And so you do have to be on top of it all the time. And when you get paired with those other strong women around you, right? And I get to work with people like Stephanie Hahn and Julie Toso, and I could the list goes on, right? On and on and on. It's just, I don't know, it's just kind of an amazing journey to make with them and watch the difference, right? That you can really like achieve. So I would say definitely the highlight, and this, it's happened to me just the other day, and this is kind of great because it's the gift that keeps giving in a good way. Is I got a text not too long ago from one of my old senior NCOs, and they're like, "Hey, I finally made it through the first sergeant school. You started this journey for me 3 years ago." Right.
Wow.
Thank you. And those are the things that you're like, yeah, I didn't suck at
Oh,
that
man.
job. Right.
That's so cool.
So yeah, I don't know. I think that those are probably the highlights, right? Like, you can go into the mission stuff and all that jazz, but I feel like that just gives you the street cred and the humility, right? And the approachability to be able to connect with people and to establish that trust and to get them to lead you.
Yeah, no, I think that had to be hard. A lot of what you said earlier about how you had to hold yourself to a higher standard than everybody else. Like you said, it's not exactly fair. Unfortunately, that was the reality. But then it brought that benefit of always being more prepared than somebody else, and just holding yourself to a standard that is your definition of what success looks like. And I feel like that's what all the best football teams do. They always hold themselves to the highest standard. They never weaken because the opponent seems to be a lazier opponent. They never bring themselves down. They always hold themselves up here. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really cool perspective to take. Yeah, wow, you've done a lot. You said you had an internship on the Hill. What was that like?
Yeah. So that was really cool. So when I Palace chased and went reserve, traditional, right? 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. I was living in Wichita Falls with my husband, and I was like, man, I'm getting kind of bored, right? Like, because I just left like this huge ops tempo, and now I'm in Wichita Falls, right? I just left the capital region, like doing this thing, and now I'm in Wichita Falls. So I'm like, okay, this isn't good for me, right? So I went back to school. I went to the political, studying political science, and yeah, there was an internship. And at the time, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee was the local representative for Wichita Falls. So I applied for an internship in Mac Thornberry's office through my school program for the summer. And I knew it was in DC, so I could drill there, right, and do those things. So it was a win-win. And I got a call back from the hiring committee, which I think, to be perfectly honest, I think these guys were like, I don't know, 25, like, and so they're just like, yeah, you're super overqualified for this. I'm like, Yeah, I'm just trying to learn something, right? I'm just trying to learn something. I'm interested in this. Like, this is just something I want to do. Also, I have a ton of friends who live in DC, so I'd really like to hang out with them for 6 weeks. But yeah, so they call me back and they said, hey, look, we're actually going to forward your information to the House Armed Services Committee. So, so I got to go work for the committee, which was amazing. I wrote several congressional briefs. I triggered a couple of actual hearings, which I didn't think was going to happen as an intern, about like mostly safety of flight in the Air Force. Because at that point in time, there had been a ton of aircraft mishaps. And my husband is a pilot. So I was very like, hey, this is a passion project for me at this point. Yeah. And then Codell went to the base in Wichita Falls. Whoopsie. Um, but, but yeah, so it was really cool. I got to learn so much about how the NDAA process worked, right? Because this is the summer. So it's going through the committee meetings, right? They're doing all these things. And you just get to learn a little piece of like inside baseball, that is happening when you're in uniform because you're waiting for budgets, right? And you understand that piece of the process. But it was really cool to see the other side of it, right? And get that insight. And it's still like to this day, I'm like, oh yeah, well, they still have to do 6 committee meetings before they can get to this part. And people are like, how do you know that? And I was like, well, I know, I was there, you know? But yeah, it was really, really cool. And honestly, a totally different perspective that I could bring back, right? When I went to drill or when I went to go do my annual tour or, whatever the case may be. So yeah, I just learned a ton. I met a lot of cool people too. And it was challenging, right? I mean, I got to hang out with the Library of Congress researchers once. It was just, I don't know. It was kind of an amazing experience when I think back about it.
That's so surreal and so cool that you got to see the inner workings around those different processes, and you get to spread your influence too. That's power. Wow. That's an incredible journey. You mentioned earlier when we started talking about the way the transition process works, how it's a little bit different for women. I wanted to dig deeper into that and find out more about your transition experience. I know we're fast forwarding a little bit, but how was that?
Yeah. So like I said, I quit twice, right? So it's kind of a reservism, right? It's so weird because every reservist that you meet has almost always been on active duty at some point. Not always, but for the most part. And so we always have this mentality of like, dude, I already quit once, like I'm here because I'm a true patriot at this point. I'm taking a pay cut, like to put my uniform on. And that is true for most folks. The first transition, I was coming out of the capital region, and I did have the resources of Andrews, which was great, right? However, because it was Palace Chase, it was a little bit rushed, right? Because I'm like, no, I Palace Chase, I have 6 weeks. They just approved it, right? Like, we got to go. It's go time. So it was a little bit rushed, and I don't think I was mentally prepared for the difference, right? I was leaving this unit where I did have a lot of influence. Like, I was a known quantity, right? Like, I had a reputation that I had built. And then I land in, Wichita Falls, and I'm having a fight with my, you know, political science, TA about was bin Laden rich or not, and I'm just like, you don't, I found myself having to get up and walk out of classes, right? Like, it was that bad. And I was kind of just grumpy and confused. And it's not because there was a problem with like taps, right? But there's no like, it's all taps is kind of like a fiscal preparation, right? Like, this is how you survive, right? This is how you get a job. This is how you find what you want to do. This is how you do this. They don't talk about the fact that all of your friends, which are basically your family, right, that you have bonded with over the years and that you can talk to whenever you want, because I'm going to hit you up on the af.mil, right? Or I'm going to hit you up via chat. That's gone in an instant, right? And this was in 2016. So LinkedIn was there, but again, from the Intel community, there's not a huge footprint at that point, right? So you kind of leave and their life goes on and yours starts completely over. And so whether you're prepared or financially capable, which I was, like that was not the issue. It was it was a mental preparation that I really needed, right? I needed somebody to sit down and tell me like your entire life is going to change. I know you think that it's not, right? But it is. And here are some ways to cope with that, right? Build a new network, right? Make your new friends. It's going to be harder because you don't have that inherent commonality, right? The communal suck, right? That you've all gone through to just jump right into a friendship, you know? But I think they do a good job at the let's prep you for A and B. But as a woman, when you separate, because, and again, this is just my story, right? This is definitely not like a holistic view. You don't typically run into a lot of powerhouse women, right? In and definitely not the same caliber that I had gotten to follow around and learn from and try to be. So you run into women who are, riding the coattails of something else, or they are completely comfortable in their like small piece of the pie, which is perfectly acceptable, by the way. But I was not ever comfortable in that space. So for me, as a woman, I don't get to go and find other like bros, right, to network with. If I walk into the VFW, people are like, "Where's your husband?" Right? And so much so that like, and those kinds of things, like as small as they are, like they hit really hard, right? And even so much as I don't know if you know this, but in Texas, there are a lot of benefits to having like a medal on your license plate. You get like free tolls, you get like, your registration $6 or whatever.
I did not know
And
that.
and so I had a medal on my license plate, and I pulled up one day to a function, and everyone's like, "Oh, when did your husband get that medal?" And I'm like, "It's mine, actually."
Wow.
And they're like, "Oh, okay." Right? And
And then they don't even
or
think anything of it. They don't ask you, well, how'd you do that? That's awesome. They
right,
just
and so
end of story.
yeah, and so it's kind of like you don't get any credit, right, for what you did, because and it's fine. I actually, there's another side of this coin which is really nice, is that a lot of times people just never know, right? And they never think to ask if you were in the service. You're like, "Oh, yeah, I lived in Germany for 2 years." And they're like, "Oh, okay." Right? They just don't assume,
Yeah.
which is kind of nice, right? Because then you get to just be that unassuming person. But it is kind of a gut punch, right? Because you know that you did the things too, right? And so but that community is just not as strong in the civilian space.
Right. Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine. It makes sense. It makes sense. I think a lot of people start a family, and when you don't go to the military and you don't end up in a high level leadership position as a woman, this is just a man talking right now, but I can totally see that. There's not as many of those elite status women that you were talking about helping you along the way in your career when you were in the military. But certainly that needs to continue to improve. We need to continue to see more of that. So, but I want to take a step back real quick. What was that medal for that was on the license plate?
It was for essentially driving the intelligence for a successful operation in the counterterrorism space. that in an area that we hadn't been able to operate in a very long time, that was a known safe haven. And it was an entire proof of concept and literally a Jackie harebrained scheme. And thank goodness it worked. And
Wow.
everyone came home who went, and then some bad guys came back too. So,
Oh my goodness.
so yeah, it was a cool thing, right, to be able to do. And the coolest part about that actually is the fact that those folks that went out on that target trusted me.
Okay.
And this was a way that we had never targeted before. And it was very technical, and a lot of the things were very hard to explain, and I'm sure that they understood them but weren't really sure how the dots got connected on my end. But they were like, okay, Jackie, if you say so, let's go.
Wow.
I
Right.
mean, it obviously wasn't that simple,
No.
but it yeah, so but that was the coolest part, right? That, well, one, that they all came back, but two, that they were willing to like put that trust in me.
Wow. So if you see Jackie driving and you see that license plate, that's how she got it. That's how she got that medal.
Yeah.
So, and I always think it's funny when somebody when it seems like somebody thinks they have you defined as a person, they think they know everything about you already, and then all
Mhm.
of a sudden they hear a story like that, and they're like, "Holy crap! I had no idea that you did stuff like that." And you're like, "Yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more." you know, that's so cool. That's so cool. So that obviously is a different kind of experience because now you're in the that was the first transition.
Yeah.
So what about the second one?
So the second one for me was much easier, right? Because again, I had already quit once, right? And I'm retiring, right? So there's a level of like stability that comes with that, you know? And and honestly, one of the reasons that I Palace chased, outside of like just, needing to take like a mental knee, you know what I mean? Was I did want to have a family, right? And so, I did want to like have the whole thing, right? I want to have the whole thing. And because I had just been so, yeah, 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 let's go do all the things my whole career, it just wasn't conducive for that, right? It wasn't even conducive to meet somebody, to vet them, to see if I wanted to have a family with them, right? So yeah, so I did, and I had that opportunity. And I say all that to say that while I was a traditional reservist and I came back on active duty, I had both my kids and I got married. And so that's its own transition, for the record. Becoming like a mom in a uniform, that's its own very unique struggle. But what it does is it teaches you, you do a lot of self-reflecting in those 3 months alone with a newborn, right? Like, so you kind of figure out like, okay, this is really what's important to me, right? I've lived this life, I've made these differences. Those were great, but these are humans, right? And this is it right here. Like, this is the pinnacle of all things. And so when I chose to retire, and I was, getting ready to I hit the button, right? And all I was thinking is, man, now my kids get to be number one. Because as a chief in the Air Force, right? I mean, we had anywhere from 80 to 100 people in our squadron at any given time. And so there were days where I was like, man, okay, am I going to let my airmen down today, or am I going to let my kids down? Right? Like, which one's it going to be? Because I can't do all of it. So which one, who am I going to let down? And I just didn't want to have that anymore. And so the decision to leave, I think, really defines the transition process for people. Because some people are definitely ready to leave, right? They're definitely ready to separate or retire. They've hit the point. They know what, they want to do. And some folks aren't, right? They're hitting the button because it's time, or they're retiring because they don't want to go PCS again, right? Or they're having their hand forced in some way, right? And so I think that defines the transition a lot. Because if you're not truly ready, then I think, the cards are just stacked against you on that side. But I was truly ready. So that made it a little bit easier. And the fact that I had already navigated, right, the civilian space also made it easier. And I will say, and this was also another perspective changer, is working in a reserve unit, right? You get to learn what these people do in their real jobs. So you get a lot of different perspectives. So you can kind of just like, semi interview your bros and be like, hey, so like, how is USAA? Do you like it? Right? Like, or how's this company? Like, how's Wells Fargo? Like, is it neat? Right? Like, so you can kind of like semi get a lay of the land, right? Which you don't get the opportunity to do when you're on active duty. So that changes the space a little bit. And you have that network because they're all civilians, right? So that makes it easier. But that is the piece I think that is super key outside of the, how you separate, defining kind of how you navigate the transition. The other piece is I definitely did myself a disservice. And, coming from the intel community, again, right, we are all secret squirrels, and we can't pee on stuff. Yeah, that's silly. And I think that I could have really begun like that civilian like mentorship network earlier, and I didn't. So I was a little late to the game on that. I have a strong network now, like, and you can't have any shame, right? Can't have any shame in that. In the military, we sort of get mentors, right? You kind of get them, right? Either through experience, assignments, or they're your boss, however that shakes out. But in the private sector, I had to hunt for a few, right? And so I find a strong woman who I like their leadership style. And I'm like, hey, you want to be my mentor? And just come right out with it, right? Like, hey, I like these things about you. I want to learn things from you. This is where I want to go in this space. I think maybe you can help, right? And I want you to be my mentor, right? And people rarely say no to those things, right? And if they do say no, great. Dodge that bullet,
That's fine.
But yeah, so I think that piece is really, really important, and then maintaining contact with your network, right? With your military family is super important still. I mean, that's how this came about, right? That's why we're talking today, is
That's why
because
this
of those.
conversation is happening. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's because of those connections, and continuing to cheer for each other and look out for opportunities for each other, right? And I think the veteran community is getting better at that. I think we're getting a lot better at that. So that's great. And then my last thing I would say is, and you kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago, and that is when people transition, you don't really know what you want to do. A lot of times because we don't really understand what these job titles mean. And mostly because they mean different things at each company. Like a director here is and a senior VP here, right? Like, it just depends. So you have to find those people that you can, bluntly ask those questions to, right? And say, hey, how do I negotiate a salary? Like what's it really look like? And what do I really need to make to maintain my lifestyle? Because those are important things that, yeah, they kind of gloss over in TAPS when you do your budget. But everybody's at that point is just filling out an Excel spreadsheet, right? Because it's 3:30 on a Friday, and we've lived that, right? We've lived training. So I think that's really, really important. And I think the challenge with a lot of folks, and I know I had this challenge, and that is our jobs don't really exist sometimes, right? In the civilian world. And TAPS does a good job at like, hey, look at these Department of Labor things and take these assessments, and maybe these things apply to you. But really, I think one of the things that we gloss over is the innate ability to do anything with what you have, right? And we all learn that, right? In the military, whether it's make something good at the chow hall, right? When you're in Bagram, that's not good. Like, I'm about to become a chef right here, right? Or whether it's like, hey, we don't have the resources to do Operation A. How do we figure out how to get it done, right? So there's that resiliency piece that we all have. And then there's this professional development thing that we gloss over, right, in the military. And especially on the enlisted side, I am 1,000% guilty of this. Oh, look, another PME, right? But those skills are just so valuable, and just communication and just connecting with people and thinking about the bigger picture and strategy, right? I'm working through my MBA right now, and I went through this organizational behavior class, and it was so difficult to take this particular instructor seriously, this professor, because everything he was teaching, I had learned when I was 22 in Airman Leadership School. And I'm like, wow, the military does a really good job at this, don't they? Dang, that's good, right? So so I think we kind of need to focus on those things. And if that's your passion, like you're already qualified to do it, right? You already have those experiences to do it. And I don't know very many senior leaders, whether they're, field grade officers or senior NCOs, who haven't sort of transformed into that role, right? Where they're like, oh man, this is way cooler than what I thought it was. So I think we skip that piece, right? We say, hey, change these words to these words, and this word needs to be that word. Well, that's just jargon, you know? That's just jargon. And that's going to change no matter where you work, right? I think there's a lot of emphasis put on that, but not a lot of put on like, these are the skill sets that you have, right? Inherently. And if it's something that you want to do, let's figure out what those roles really are, right? Are they the director of learning and development, right? Are they in HR, right? Like, what are they? Do you want to be a trainer? You know? So those kinds of things, I think just learning the new landscape, right? The same way that we memorized ranks on like day 3 of boot camp, like it's just a new place and it's gotten this like mysticism attached to it, which I think is just not realistic. I don't know if that answered your question or if I just went down a tangent, but
I love your tangents, Jackie. You're very comprehensive in your answers, and I just want to add to that. I believe that the resume problem, it's not a problem if you do the networking thing the right way. You can put whatever you could show up with a blank piece of paper on a resume. Just fill it in. I mean, make sure it's at least basic.
yeah,
But as long as you have a conversation with somebody at the company that you're interested in, you can communicate, then you can get a job. And if you network well, and we can totally show you how to network, reach out to Jackie if you want help networking. She's got that down to a science. I can help you with that too. But you don't have to have a perfect resume perfectly translated into the civilian world if you want to get a job. That's certainly nonsense. But gosh, like I said, super comprehensive with everything that you've talked about today. A lot of the nuggets of information apply to more than just military, it applies to people in general. You're faced with a tough decision. You want to be able to grow your family or continue on within your career. And sometimes that's just a hard decision that you have to make. You can't necessarily do both at the highest level. But what's most important to you? What are you going to end up feeling better about at the end of the day, that you took care of your people or you took care of your kids and your husband? I think that's probably where I hope most people are going to be leaning. But I know we're at time here. I just wanted to make sure before we get into the last questions, we didn't get the chance to talk too much about your current role. If you wanted to dig into that a little bit, totally. If there's anything else you want to cover before I ask you the final question, I want to do that.
Well, the only thing I would say about my current role is I think I think this might be a little bit of a disservice, and I don't think it's malicious, right, from the separation process. I think it just kind of gets glossed over again. And that is your first job doesn't have to be the rest of your life, right? You can just take the job, right? Learn something from it and then use that to figure out if it's really what you want to do. You know, like it doesn't have to be the forever job. We can quit now, guys. Like it's a real thing, right? So, so I will say, and that's kind of what I was thinking. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go into this place. I like the culture, right? I was very frank and upfront in my questions in the interview and very, very clear about my priorities, right? And, and you kind of spoke to this earlier too, which was this I am an individual contributor right now. And I did that on purpose because I needed a break, right? I just needed a break. Do I always want to be an individual contributor? No, because I'm never going to let some of that stuff go, right? And that's what really fills my cup and that's what drives me, right? That's my why, if you will. But it's okay for right now, right? I get to learn so much from so many different people. It's a great culture fit. Like all those things are amazing. So I would say don't be scared. Be more comfortable or as comfortable as you can being uncomfortable and just jump in. You know, it doesn't have to be the forever space. You're never going to learn about what exists out there unless you just dip your toes in the water.
I love that. It doesn't have to be your favorite space. I feel like I've literally have had like 1,000 jobs since leaving the military. So yeah, it don't go overboard like that. But certainly don't feel stuck. Don't feel like you have to be in a place that you don't like. You've already done that for long periods of time in your military career. I'm sure all of us have. So yeah, be open to making a change if it's important. Yeah, I guess what's next for you? What's I know you're loving things at the current role, and what's what's on the horizon? What how far can you see right now, goals wise?
Man, that's a good question. I ask myself that all the time. Like, what do I want to be when I grow up?
Yeah,
And you know what's funny is it really isn't what I want to be when I grow up. It's kind of where I want to be. And that is I still want to do the things, right? I still want to drive change, right? Streamline things. Like I found a real passion in process improvement, right? I love collaborating across teams. It's one of my favorite things to do, right? Is be like, hey, but you did say this, and so did you. Now, I built this bridge. You guys go forth and conquer, right? I like being able to do those things. And it's such a soft skill, right? That you kind of have some hard skills to back that up. So yeah, so I think right now I'm just in a place where there are still some things that I need to learn and be more familiar with, right? Again, because it's not lost on me that I am a rookie in this space, right? Yes, I have all of these experiences and I have all of this other background, and that comes into play sometimes, right? But I think, you know, if we were asking Jackie the 5-year question, right? Like, where do I want to be? I want to be in a place where I can take some of the knowledge that I've gained, right? Maybe over the next 1 to 3 years and apply that in a way that is familiar to me and I know how. So kind of like an amalgamation of those things I think is really that would really be the pinnacle for me. And I'm not a title person. Like I don't really care about that. I care more about like, did I make your life easier? Right? Did I change something that helped? Right? And hopefully that still gets to tie into the greater good. But for the most part, I don't know either. So that's kind of my penciled in plan for right now. But again, because I don't believe in luck, I have some boxes that I need to check, right? So that
sure.
when opportunity knocks, I can say yes and no one has a reason to say no.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you love giving back. It sounds like you love coaching and leading, being a servant leader of a team. So I can only imagine what's next. It sounds like it's going to be pretty exciting no matter what. But want to ask you that last question about if you were to go back in time to a moment in your life where you needed some advice, what would that be?
Um, that's hard. I feel like I need advice all the time. But I think again, like I just was surrounded with so many great people and mentors and just like super strong leaders that I question this sometimes. I'm like, why did I enlist? Like, could I have had more of an impact as an officer? Like, I was on that track, right? But because I'm a fly by the seat of my pants kind of gal, I wanted to leave the dirt road as quickly as I could, and so I was like, how do I get out of here like right now? And that's why I enlisted. But I do sometimes wonder if I had gotten my commission and, you know, and been in a place to make that transition and been and maybe not from the beginning, right? Because I'm a huge fan of prior enlisted officers, huge fan. I think that's such great perspective, right? And knowledge. But could I have had more of an impact, And if somebody would have sat me down and said, hey, you should probably drop that commission packet, you know? But I never asked that question. So, I mean, it floated around in the back of my mind, but I never asked it out loud. And I think that would probably be it because, you can have a lot of impact. And I loved being a chief. I wouldn't give that away for anything. By the time I was a senior master sergeant, there was no way a commission packet was getting dropped, right? But as a younger NCO, I think I could have taken a totally different path, right? I don't know, right? If I'd be in this place because of that or not, or not because of that at this moment. So it's hard to say, but I do wish that I would have asked the question.
Interesting. Well, I wonder how that's gonna trickle into the future for you. We'll see if there's any chance that something similar to that ends up coming, but
Yeah.
who knows? That's powerful stuff though. I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate you taking the time today to go over this entire journey that you've been on, that you're going on right now. I look forward to seeing what people say about this conversation, and I hope people reach out to you and they reach out to Amplify Veterans to find out more.
Yeah. This is amazing, Nick. Thank you so much for reaching out and chatting with me. And yeah, I'm just so excited that you're doing this. I think it's an amazing project.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll hang out for a few minutes, but thanks again. Take care. As we conclude this episode of Amplify Veterans, I want to emphasize the importance of supporting our veterans in times of need. If you or someone you know is struggling, remember, help is always available. The Veterans Crisis Line provides confidential support 24/7. Reach out to them by dialing 988 and then select option 1. You can also go to veteranscrisisline.net for more information.